It may be the best-selling game of the year, but that has not saved Battlefield 6 from the same thing that happens to just about all live service games at some point. Basically, the friction catches up. The honeymoon period ends, and for Battlefield, the think pieces have already started. We're talking about the game losing steam, Battlefield 6 desperately needs a wake-up call, and of course the classic is Battlefield 6 dying. Those are reasonable worries to have. The game's had a bumpy time, but I'd also say the honeymoon period never really started. There were issues from the beginning. But now, well, we've got a bit of additional information. Season 2 is coming, but it's actually been delayed. And it's been delayed only a week before it was due to begin. Do you know what that says to me? It says that somebody hit the big red button that says emergency. The Battlefield Studios people are clearly aware they need to convince people, even if that means telling people craving new content that they're going to have to wait a bit longer. Okay, some timeline context. All of this is going on as Battlefield 6 Season 1 comes to an end. There's been some odd dramas, a cancelled pro RedSec tournament that was cancelled over bugs, icons being accused of being AI generated, a pro tier battle pass that needed an emergency patch to even be completable, and one where the final reward was a skin very similar to a Call of Duty character. Battlefield Studios haven't responded to the AI bit, they've indefinitely delayed the tournament, they've dropped patches, but clearly not everyone is happy, and it's clear that the content cadence isn't really matching up with people's expectations. But that being said, from Battlefield Studios' perspective, I think responding to all of this promptly in January is going to be a little harder when the organization has of course lost their leader. It's what happened whenever Vince Zampella died just before Christmas. That is horrible on so many personal levels, and of course also so many professional levels, when you're dealing with ultimately what is a humongous organization comprising loads of different studios. Now, while all of this has been going on, the same complaints that have plagued the game since launch are continuing to fill up the user reviews. I mean, it's really no wonder that over in Steam, they're sitting at 67% positive overall, but only 52% recent. I mean, just look at SteamDB, look at the slope. 90% of players are gone. Except I would say concurrent players don't exactly tell the whole story. Now, it would be ludicrous to deny the obvious. Like, the trend is clear. This game is absolutely losing players. Peak-to-peak concurrent players are down from the start of the season. They're down from more than 500k to now dipping below 100k. That's a really big drop. And if you only look at Steam concurrency, yeah, you'd argue that they lost 90% of their player base. But what if we expand our vision out a little bit? I mean, the week after Christmas, Battlefield was still the third most played game on Steam in the US. It was only 2 places down from the launch of Season 1. Over in consoles, the decline was slightly more pronounced, but mostly in one platform where it moved from 7th to 9th on PlayStation and from 3rd to 8th in Xbox, which puts it roughly where it was on console performance before the season launched. So, the aggregate player base is still really high for a video game out in the market, and it's actually pretty damn good for a Battlefield game. Battlefield has often had major player drop-offs. I think EA's probably satisfied enough with 10% retention in Steam alone, which is actually in and around the industry baseline after a month. But numbers are just numbers. There's also the qualitative, there's also what people are feeling. Because by the numbers, Battlefield did have an incredible launch. There were clear bugs. I mean, Battlefield friends recently returned to skewer the flying hammers, but sales were good. Players were optimistic. But then a series of events would shake confidence. The RedSec modes arrived, the Battle Pass challenges appeared, monetization pop-ups started hitting you on launch, pushing you to buy into things. And over time, people left and left as the experience suffered what I think is basically a death by 1,000 cuts. Just that here, it's not dead. It certainly, though, is in between 2 rounds of its boxing match, and it's not looking as good as the other guy. The problems of Battlefield, let's talk about them, and for some context, I've been playing Battlefield for a long time. Over half of my life on Earth, so I do love Battlefield, especially playing 2 back in the day in PC. But anyway, there are 2 broad camps of complaints about this game. There's experiential issues and there's structural issues. As an example, the Winter Offensive update introduced bugs that caused menus to glitch, it was real infuriating, and movement to be nerfed. Those are experiential problems. They're unintentional, they're easily fixed, or targeted for fixes once the source can be identified. And issues like this have been going on and being fixed since the start of the game. Little things like asking players to play a Battle Royale mode for challenges that didn't exactly go down well, so they added a reroll function. Honestly, I'm still not that happy with that solution. Piss off, I don't want to play a battle royale, I'm here for Battlefield. Anyway, there's other things, like say the bugged anti-air missiles that could never be avoided. That was fixed over time. The less grounded skins that got complained about, those were also fixed over time. Now, a small amount of things aren't going to be fixed because they overlap with the structural issues. Things like, say, the pop-up you get when you launch the game reminding you that the Battle Pass exists. Well, the metrics on conversion for that must be great, because clearly they're good enough for them to justify that thing's continuing popping up, even though it appears quite often in negative reviews. Maybe they think that's something that pisses people off that they will talk about in a negative review, but that it's maybe not the core reason why that player left. Do they want to focus on, the last bit of straw that broke the camel's back? Or do they want to focus on the reasons why the camel is already barely able to stand up anymore? At least for that player. But then there's the structural issues. These are the big problems, and they're the ones that take far longer to fix because they're inherent both to the game, which does mean the game as a piece of software, and also the development pipeline for this game. Because remember, for Battlefield 6, the development pipeline was huge and sometimes quite a shit show. Okay, progression. It was always going to be tied to Battle Pass. That's how the thing works. That's the business model. They were always going to sell cosmetics, which is, unfortunately, the price of entry for being a AAA multiplayer game in current year. Now, at least they're not forcing you to pay for gameplay-changing features. COD certainly does tiptoe its way across that line from time to time. And similarly, things like private servers, which are a core gripe, well, are also quite unlikely, I would say. Because those are core elements of how the game functions that, to change, well, would require massive reworks. Some structural problems can be changed though. We've seen suggestions even that they will be changed eventually, just not perhaps within a 3-month season, let alone one that's got a Christmas break slammed into the middle. And these are the more common complaints about the game. Bigger maps, wanting more content, wanting a change in direction. And when I think about this game personally as a Battlefield player, I'm probably not going to stop playing the game because a pop-up annoyed me. I'm going to stop playing the game because there aren't enough maps to hold my interest, or there just isn't enough diversity in maps to hold my interest, or that the maps aren't particularly good. So, Season 1 then. Not everyone liked it. There were the experiential bugs, which kind of exacerbated some of the worst aspects of maps like Blackwell Fields. It plays a lot better when you don't have the weird anti-air situation that it launched with. But there was, I'd say, an underlying theme to much of the Season 1 criticism. It wasn't the bugs, it was the content. It was the new maps and the new modes, that BF Studios weren't responding to the complaints people had since launch. That basically they were rolling out their content plan, and that within that plan, there was just stuff catering to quick action, infantry-focused play with even the smaller player count modes like Strike Point, that it essentially felt kind of COD-like, and that in the context of smaller maps, and people talking about the laning in those maps, that it is kind of feeling like big-scale COD to some. How obviously, there's no real way to change that within the span of Season 1, something that they will have already made before the game even came out. And the problem for Battlefield Studios is, they couldn't change any of that. They basically had to release something though, and that meant that it totally looked like they were ignoring complaints. And a lot of those complaints were coming from classic Battlefield players, meaning that the idea that, we've been betrayed. We've been sold out to get the COD kiddies and the Warzone people, just that the COD people are infesting our game, and why does RedSec exist? Did anyone really want that? I think that's what some of the core fans are going to be feeling, and that is the thing that they need to solve. And the rough bit is it may not even be fixed for Season 2. Just make Battlefield. Just make core Battlefield. Come on. So many of us think back to the days of Battlefield 1 where, in the non-live service realm, it seemed they could shit out a massive number of really good maps. The content of that game was amazing. That's probably why things have been rough here. I mean, we knew what Season 1 would be within 2 weeks of the game's launch. It was fully laid out, running until the Christmas break. Everything made for that season could not respond to complaints from reviews because it was already content locked. Look, you can't launch something like RedSec with everything ready and QA checked only a few weeks after the game itself, outlying busted weapon and gadget interactions aside. But basically, it's not a situation where BF Studios could suddenly just move up a remake of Caspian Border or Panzerstorm just up the pipeline to launch in November because, well, it's a month in and people really want a big map. You can't do it that quickly. That's the challenge. Because everything we've seen thus far, it wasn't built in response to people, it was built around the launch of BF6, one designed to compete with Call of Duty by providing a free-to-play funnel for new people, and then getting things as stable as possible before Christmas. That's been their whole point, basically. Stability to build on, because there's just some shit they can't change that quickly. And that's why I think Season 2 will still be controversial, because a lot of these problems are just inherent in the business model, and more importantly, in the way that the studios are structured to support that business model. It's one of those things I think anyone in the dev world will know. It's not like the more programmers you throw into a situation, the faster a project will come out. Quite often the opposite. And nowhere is that more clear than with the delay of Season 2's launch. The studio have pushed it back from the expected launch to the 17th of February. Basically, it's a full month delay, and in that delay, Season 1 is going to be extended. There are some cosmetic rewards for people who have paid for the Battle Pass. So why do this? Why do a delay, especially when people are hungry for more? And the answer is fairly simple. It's your feedback, that rather than launching Season 2, January 20th will have an update, but it's just one with fixes and stability improvements. No new content to commit to that could, of course, just go and introduce more problems. And to make sure that Season 2 doesn't do that and doesn't misfire, Battlefield Labs is going to be used to test the upcoming content. Some are seeing the delay as a death knell, but I'd say at least in one way, it's Battlefield Studios recognizing that they have got to launch their content more strongly, right? They cannot have stuff that's fragile. They cannot have as many bugs. They need less criticism for even the experimental things that they sometimes put in the game. I would say the worry, though, is that I've heard a lot of those things from 343 Industries. You see, Halo Infinite was in many ways a fantastic base game experience, but the problem was they had to delay and delay and delay. And I'd say often for very good reasons. They had bugs to fix. They needed to get their content pipeline in order. But those delays were just so often and so large that the game never really was able to recapture its momentum. Similar happened to Battlefield 2042, though in this case, I don't think we're going to be waiting as long. As for the season's content, well, some people are already hoping that the month delay means larger structural changes to the game. Perhaps, say, a whole suite of classic map remakes being put into the game. If that is true, I would absolutely be delighted. I'd be on the moon. It would be great. But I think it's closer to the truth to say that if something wasn't already planned for Season 2, then it's probably not going to pop up out of nowhere just within an extra few weeks, especially considering console patch certification. I think they're doing something, though, to make sure that Season 2 feels more substantial. Maybe it's them committing to more content, but in the back half of the season, or just trying to have a better day one experience. I think that's all possible. I just don't think they're going to say, hey, here's 4 remade maps. We've listened to you. Now, Season 2 was already in dev whenever Season 1 launched, and not in a, oh, they're keeping content back and drip feeding us way. I don't think that. But we have seen data mining that points to some of the weapons and vehicles that we can expect to see in the game with this season. Now, the bright side is that while you can't change a whole dev model while you're actually shipping it, you can respond and tweak. So I think the maps of Season 2 will probably have taken some influence from the launch criticisms. You know, layout somewhat adjusted, that sort of thing. But I don't think it's a situation where resources could have been taken from RedSec or skin development and just thrown into making more maps. And that's because those are different teams, maybe in different studios, they're across different disciplines, and those barriers will exist regardless of how many people are working on your game. And in fact, the more people are working on your game, and the more that they're siloed off into their specific area of responsibility, well, yeah, the less cross-functional they're going to be. It's not like you can pull a character artist over to QA or level design to just focus on making more of what people are asking the most loudly for. Essentially, and to put it in military terms, because hey, I want to stay on theme, it's a bit of a force structure issue. And that force structure issue comes from the operational requirements that force has been built to support, which is a big live service game. That's essentially the issue. I think we'll get real responses to all this eventually. It's just that this is a giant AAA supertanker that can only move slowly. Not because the captain of the ship wants it to move slowly, but because it's just so bloody big that that's how it moves. That's the problem with live service in a world where everyone is gearing up to have a bit of the Fortnite business model and a bit of the Fortnite content cadence. Now, to continue with critiques, well, one of them for Season 1 was that the Ice Lock limited time mode was a disappointment, as was Strike Point. Personally, I actually really liked Strike Point. I really did not like Ice Lock, and I just stopped trying to force myself from playing it because I wanted to get the cool little pickaxe reward, but I just realized that that's a great way for me to just not want to play Battlefield 6 anymore. Now, suggestions have arisen that these limited time modes are effectively a huge waste of time, especially since Portal exists and the community are going to build those things anyway. The obvious implication being, how about the professional Battlefield devs focus on making the thing that everyone comes to Battlefield for? The maps existing in the core Battlefield modes, not a bunch of random other stuff. I do mostly sympathize with that point, but one of the biggest successes of Battlefield 6 is called Escalation Mode. It actually, though, came from Battlefield 2042, because in 2042, they did a limited time mode, and that limited time mode basically is escalation. That's an experiment that worked out really well. And if you can only ship experiments that work out well, then you're not really experimenting. Especially because the data that matters most is not you having fun in the office, it's your players having fun when they actually play it. So as much as I kind of hated Ice Lock, I am at least glad that they're willing to experiment. But maybe doing that in a way that is tied into its own event pass makes it feel a little bit less like a fun optional experiment and more like a, hello piggy, come to your trough because we have a new event pass for you to grind. That doesn't feel good. But what if I told you EA already knows all of this stuff? You see, EA recently sent out loads of surveys on Battlefield 6 and RedSec. Now, they do this after they launch all of their games because they basically need to know what needs to change. But they've already been quite clear that they've heard the complaints. Basically, the group's holiday wrap-up promised more for all of the major concerns. That means refinements and quality of life across the board, new maps and weapons that promise fresh tactical opportunities, hopefully those afforded to us by the map being bigger, and seasons feeling even more consequential for players. They've already started on one of those promises though. They're now giving better promotion to the portal modes inside the core game. That's really good, but I still think the Netflix style UI they're going with is actually just hurting discoverability. As for delaying the second season for Polish, I think that's just showing they're very aware they can't launch new content with the experiential issues that plagued Season 1. No one wants to appear on patch day and see people, as an example, riding drones up into the sky and just sniping everyone. That stuff felt shit. But right now, we just can't be sure if it'll bring those structural changes that people really want. I think the big thing, though, is the lag time between players complaining, teams adapting, and then the release. Because that's not always clear to a player base. And I think it's the real struggle here. And that means that whenever people see population charts suggesting the game is collapsing, they of course worry. They worry because they care. And like me, lifelong Battlefield player, they want Battlefield to do well. So of course, they'll make think pieces to work out how to fix it. I mean, when I put on my other hat and I run a World of Warcraft YouTube channel, I'm often doing the exact same thing. The trouble is, we just can't see what's already being done until it's finished and arrives. And it's that gap in visibility that I think is why all of this feels so alarming to players. Now, one thing that alarmed people in Battlefield 6 was the AI stuff, I think from some of the emblems and rewards. That's a big worry. And a similar story happened to Larian. They have since, though, done a full AMA, and they've actually spelt out a lot, and where a lot of studios have just avoided the issue, Larian have basically drawn a fairly clear line in the sand. If you'd like to learn about that, watch this video next.